here to for a briefing on the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. We have the officials from the Department of the Environment as well as from the Department of Industry, and of course we have our Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development here with us. So without further ado, I'm told there are two opening statements only, one from Francis Bilodeau and the other from Commissioner DeMarco. So we'll start with Mr. Bilodeau first, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'd like to take a moment to thank the Anishinaabe people and pay respect to their elders. Je tiens vraiment à remercier des membres du comité pour l'opportunité.
I would like to thank the
Zéro du Fonds stratégique pour l'innovation.
J'entends rien? Oh, I would like to thank my colleagues
at Innovation, Science and Economic Development are thankful that the audit conducted by the Commissioner of the Environment has led to such interest in the program, and it is my hope that by answering your questions today, I can provide more clarity about the NZA's mandate and its operations. To aid in this, and further to your committee's request of June 4th, ISED has provided copies of all the term sheets and contribution agreement signed through the NZA, and a copy of the NZA tracker tool. Due to the sensitive nature of some of the information that's been shared with you, I'll be happy to discuss these documents in more detail in the in-camera portion of the meeting. Climate change is a complex challenge, and the NZA addresses it with a multifaceted solution across three pillars. The first is decarbonizing large emitting sectors. Pillar 2 is accelerating industrial transformation, and Pillar 3 is advancing clean technology development and Canada's battery ecosystem. The NZA tracker tool provides a detailed snapshot of the NZA's progress towards these investment pillars. Projects signed to date across all pillars are expected to generate emissions reductions of roughly 11.2 megatons. Through the first pillar, the NZA is encouraging significant investments in large emitters to reduce their near-term greenhouse gas emissions. These efforts towards GHG reductions from this sector also enhance our competitive edge in a globally decarbonizing economy. To date, 3 agreements, including Algoma, ArcelorMittal Dofasco, have been signed to decarbonize the steel-making industry and are expected to generate about 7.2 megatons. Beyond the signed projects, other large emitter projects are in our pipeline and continue to advance through due diligence. We expect these projects could add up to 10 megatons in additional reductions. Ces grands projets de transformation nécessitent.
These major transformation projects require government support to help de-risk the investment, enabling companies to significantly reduce their short-term emissions while remaining financially viable in a competitive market. Nevertheless, a company's decision ultimately depends on a number of factors. Barriers to a final investment decision include high initial costs, low project maturity, the risks associated with adopting new technologies, and changing material and labor costs. The projects under Pillar 1 were the main focus of the Commissioner's audit. However, the NZA also supports projects that promote the development of clean technologies and support the transformation of businesses and industrial sectors with a view to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. Pillar 2 and 3 projects represent an estimated reduction of 4 megatons, resulting from both on-site reductions and the deployment of clean technologies.
NZA Pillars 2 and 3 include projects such as Savante, which is a company that's building equipment needed for carbon capture and storage. With a manufacturing facility in Burnaby, British Columbia, Savante will support carbon capture and storage needs of hard-to-abate sectors, including cement, steel, oil and gas in Canada, but also around the world. The deployment of Savante's innovative technologies are expected to contribute to significant GHG reductions in Canada and globally. The market for carbon capture is growing, with regulations in place in Canada, the USA, and Europe, highlighting the growing demand for these technologies. In terms of advancing clean technology development in Canada's battery ecosystem, the NZA has invested in projects such as Volkswagen PowerCo's battery cell manufacturing project and GM's electric vehicle manufacturing efforts. Projects are pivotal in developing a robust Canadian EV ecosystem. Tout comme les projets de véhicules électriques qui
Just as electric vehicle projects are helping to build the supply chain and secure the future of Canada's innovative automotive sector, the NZA is helping to transform the Canadian economy by advancing emerging clean technologies such as small modular reactors, nuclear fusion, carbon capture and sequestration, next-generation aircraft, and many others across Canada. For all NZA-funded projects, ISED ensures that contractual obligations and performance requirements defined in the initiative are met. Where the NZA is able to assess significant GHG reductions as a result of the project, contribution agreements include provisions to reduce and/or meet emissions intensity standards. Contribution agreements include provisions that impose consequences if minimal thresholds are not met. GHG reductions are monitored and tracked through progress reports.
environmental benefits, NZA investments set commitments to foster substantial economic activities. Since the launch of the NZA, companies have committed to create and maintain over 36,000 jobs and create over 14,000 co-op positions. They've also made research and development commitments totaling $4.5 billion. Those are not insignificant numbers. Indeed, they highlight the critical impact that projects funded through the NZA can have on Canada's economy, in addition to supporting global climate goals. So I hope the documents that have been submitted to the committee will provide a clearer picture of the broader investment principle that underpin the NZA. Puis je vous remercie de m'avoir donné la parole.
And I thank you for having given me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bilodeau. We now ask our Commissioner, Mr. DeMarco, to speak to us.
Here today to discuss our report on the Strategic Innovation Fund's Net Zero Accelerator Initiative, which was tabled in Parliament in April 2024. I would too like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Joining me today is Nicolas Blouin, the director who led the audit team. The Net Zero Accelerator Initiative aims to lower greenhouse gas emissions by incentivizing Canadian industries to decarbonize their operations. Our audit focused specifically on manufacturing, and we looked at whether Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada managed the initiative to decarbonize the manufacturing industries in accordance with Canada's climate goals and with due regard to value for money. Nous avons constaté qu'innovation
We found that Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada had failed to attract the country's largest industrial emitters. At the time of the audit, from a potential of 55 large emitting companies, having only 15 applied for funding under the initiative, and 2 of them had signed agreements. The application process is lengthy and complex, and requires on average 407 hours to complete. This has likely not helped the department's efforts to attract more applicants. Only 2 large emitters and 15 smaller emitters have signed contribution agreements worth a total of $3.2 billion. But only 5 of these companies had a signed commitment to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. These commitments totaled only 6.2 megatons, which is less than 1% of Canada's total GHG emissions.
There was no industrial decarbonization policy that involved all relevant government organizations. Such a policy would provide Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada with a clearer picture of which industries are most in need of funds to reduce emissions. Our audit uncovered significant gaps, and the department provided vague responses to our recommendations. I am therefore concerned about what the department plans to do to address these gaps. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee members may have. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Before starting, I would like to indicate that for the next 2 hours, I will assume it's the same meeting. We won't start the next hour with 6 turns. We'll continue with 6 minutes turns. We'll have 5 minutes. So the first turn is 6 minutes, and all the other turns will be 5 minutes long. Yes, Ms. Colts.
Understanding we'd have 2 meetings, one in camera and one out of camera, and that those would be 2 separate meetings.
Well, since the witnesses don't change, but yeah, we're going into camera, but I mean, it's not like we have a new set of witnesses.
The difficulty is that severely cuts off the time that the Bloc and the NDP have to question witnesses. It changes that pretty dramatically. It means that our follow-up questioning is shorter than normal, and my understanding is we were going to have 2 separate meetings.
I understand. Yes, one would always want to get more time. I get that.
And just to clarify, not more time, just the amount of time that would be normally allotted if we're having 2 separate meetings, one in camera and one out of camera.
Just a moment. I'll defer to the committee. Do I have UC to start over again with the 6-minute round in the second hour? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officials for coming out this afternoon. This will be for ISED. How much money was given to PowerCo through the Net Zero Accelerator Fund? Just the amount, dollar amount, please.
Is 700 million. Zero has been dispersed today.
700 million.
Correct.
700 million. PowerCo company is owned by Volkswagen Group, a German company that made over $450 billion in revenue last year. How many emissions are supposed to be directly reduced from the $700 million handout?
Go ahead if you didn't say it, if you have it. I'll find the.
Maybe you can stop the timer. I don't know.
Sorry, there's a number of projects, and so you're asking for specific megatons. We do have the information. We just need a minute to get to it.
Can we pause the time?
Yeah, but then the question is, somebody has to
So-
look up.
Well, how many emissions?
So I will answer. Obviously, this is a battery deal, and if you look at the types of investments, our first pillar is about the large industrial emitters. They're intended to get to emissions in the 2030 timeline. Battery deals are part of a second and third pillar, which are intended to build the technologies for future and to build the economy of the future.
I realize there's different pillars and all that, but can you tell us how many emissions are directly reduced by a $700 million handout to this company?
And so the investments we are making are intended to build technology.
So it's just a yes or no. Can you tell us how many emissions have been reduced?
Our GHG emissions that we are calculated in a quantitative amount are those up to 2030. These are intended to generate GHG emissions beyond that, and so I
you
don't have a
can't tell
number
us?
to give you.
You can't tell us.
There is no
You
quantitative
can't tell
assessment.
us how many emissions
Point
have
of
been
order, Mr.
reduced
Chair.
for $700 million.
Mr. Vancouver.
Multinational
Excuse me,
billion
Mr.
dollar
Mazier.
company.
Mr. Mazier.
Our non-partisan witnesses who are here to help us
Yeah.
reform our report are not partisans, and they're not to be berated by my fellow MPs. I think that's inappropriate. They're not on trial for something, and that type of conduct
Yeah,
is inappropriate.
okay, well, we'll continue, but I think Mr. Bilodeau's answer was pretty clear. There's 2 phases, one which includes GHG reduction estimates, and the second phase is more geared towards laying the groundwork for the future. It's not that he doesn't want to say what or that they've never thought about the issue, but it's just that that's the way it's divided up. But anyway, we'll continue.
So I'll ask the question again. How many emissions are supposed to be directly reduced from the $700 billion handout to PowerCo? Just how many emissions? Can you tell me? Yes or no?
That's
pretty
contradictory. That's
simple question.
contradictory,
Can you- do you have any idea?
Mr. Mazier,
I
you're
will try
saying,
and answer.
It's
Mr. Mazier, I stopped the clock, but just so that we set the tone, there's a contradiction in your questioning there. You're saying how many, and then it becomes a yes or no question. But I'll let Mr.
Can you tell
Bilodeau
us-
take care of himself.
I'll just move on.
Okay,
I'll move on. How about that?
go ahead, Mr. Bilodeau. I'm sure that we're
Well,
going to hit our stride here, and it's going to be smooth. But
Our calculations are based on emissions that are up to 2030. Beyond that, calculating emissions is a very unclear science, so we've not done quantitative assessments, but we do expect that the investments in battery and the electrification
Okay, well, you can't, so you can't tell us.
Point of order,
I
Mr.
gotta
Chair.
have another second question.
Sorry,
This
yes,
one's
Mr.
pretty
Vancouver.
clear cut.
Excuse me,
This
Mr.
one is
Mazier,
really
I've
easy, I
stopped the
promise.
clock. We have a point of order. We are finishing. I mean, the plan is to finish at 6:30. So what's the point of order?
Just as Mr. Bilodeau started answering the question, Mr. Mazier interjected again. I
It's
would
not
like
a
to
point
hear
of
the
order.
answers.
This is $8
I would
billion,
like to hear the
Adam.
answers.
$8 billion, for heaven's sakes.
Try to let's just tone it down a bit. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Mazier.
Again, for I said, the Environment Committee ordered the government to release the contracts for the $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator Fund. When we went to read the contracts, over 360 pages were completely ripped out of the contracts. Who ripped out these pages?
To be clear, no pages were ripped out, pages were redacted. We've tried to strike the balance between ensuring that the committee and Parliament has all available information that it needs to properly hold government to account and do its work. At the same time, we have obligations that are both legal and contractual. And so working with the committee, we built out an approach which is intended to ensure that you have information in camera. We have obviously a legal obligation to consult with third parties on the use of this information.
You did not answer my question because those were pages ripped out of the contracts. They were numbered and there were pages ripped out of the contracts. A total of 360. This is what 360 pages look like. 360 pages are ripped out of these contracts. Now, who ripped them out? I went and read through the contracts. 360 pages were ripped out.
Mr. Mazier, I think
Who
this is
ripped
a
them
prop.
out?
Mr. Mazier, I think this qualifies as a prop, especially since there's nothing written on those pages.
This is the point.
Yeah,
This is the point.
I understand, but it is
what it
a
looks like.
prop. It is a prop, and
This is
I
what it looks
prefer
like,
that we
Chair,
didn't
though.
use props.
Like everybody
You
thinks,
made
oh,
your
it's
point. You
360
made your
pages.
point
This is
about
what-
366 pages,
find it
but
funny, that's
let's not use props because it's gonna.
Well, here, I'll just leave 'em right here.
It's gonna go
Anyway.
sideways if we start using props.
Yeah, and I don't have to remember. I guess the truth hurts. So, who ripped out the pages out of the contracts?
The department removed information that was deemed commercially confidential in the context of our third-party consultations with the recipients.
So, it was the department that ripped out the pages?
The department removed information that was deemed commercially confidential by third-party recipients.
Did the minister know that these pages were ripped out?
The minister would have been made aware of the information that is being provided by to the committee.
So the minister is on purposely ripping out pages out of the contracts to hide information from this committee.
The department is doing its is meeting its obligation in terms of meeting its contractual obligations to recipients and its legal obligation vis-a-vis existing statutes to ensure that information that is commercially confidential and could cause prejudice to companies is not released.
What is the government's emissions reduction target for the $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator Fund?
Reports by both the Auditor General and Environment Canada have articulated that the program is expected to meet between 19 and 20 megatons reduction. It's our anticipation that the program will meet approximately that amount.
Okay, time's up. Time's up, sorry. Okay, Madame Châtel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here, because it's important to talk about how we're going to shape Canada's economy so that we can be successful on the international level. We don't want to be left behind. There's a huge transformation of all global economies. And the Strategic Fund for Innovation, the Net Zero Accelerator are important funds to give an impetus so that we can align Canada's industrial sector towards a transition and success in tomorrow's economy. Thank you, Mr. Bilodeau. Thank you to your colleagues. I have questions about this global race to clean technologies. And can you explain to us how the Net Zero Accelerator helps position Canada on the international scene? Yes, certainly. In my introductory speech, I talked about 3 pillars. One is on short-term decreases until 2030. We're hoping that with the large emitters participating, we can have a major effect on our reductions. The second one concerns industrial transformation, and it's to help sectors carry out the transformation necessary to decrease the emission of GHGs. And our final pillar is related to clean technologies and wants to build technologies which will allow Canada and the world, not only Canada, to have the necessary technologies to reach our global objectives of reducing GHGs. I talked about Savante, which is a major company that will be capturing GHG gases. So there are a lot of there's a lot of innovation, and emissions from transportation is about 20%. So the efforts that will allow us to find technologies that will allow to decrease these emissions are critical for achieving our objectives. To date, we have committed $4.5 billion for a total of 23 projects, including 3 large emitters. Can you explain to us the importance of investing in those projects in order to put Canada in a good position in this economy and this technology, which will bring us to an economy that can be prosperous in the future? So far, the 3 projects in Pillar 1 include Algoma Steel, which will be replacing the furnace technologies, the blast furnaces, in order to allow them to make the transition towards a low emissions economy while continuing to continue their operations of creating jobs and furthering Canada's economy. A second one is Ancillary Metal, is a project that will help modernize practices that can help reduce GHG emissions in the steel sector. And the third project within the first pillar, Heidelberg Materials, will allow us to capture GHG gases at their cement plant. And if you hadn't redacted the confidential information that endangers the competitiveness of our businesses from this report, and the Conservatives had published them, would Chinese businesses or other businesses been able to steal the this information from our Canadian companies? Well, yes, we have to keep that information confidential under the law. And secondly, some of these businesses considered that this information might endanger their competitiveness. Secondly, in terms of for the government, we have to have trusted partners in order to attract investment, and so that to encourage large emitters to work with the government. It depends on the confidence they have in us, that we will meet the obligations set out in the agreements we conclude with them. So making that information public could endanger our capacity to act in an efficient way in the future. So it would be very irresponsible on the part of the Conservatives to be asking for that information, that it be made public. It could harm not only current businesses and their international competitiveness, but also prevent businesses from applying for our programs. I'll say what I said initially. We have an obligation, but also these companies are expecting that the government meets the conditions of the agreements so that we don't lose competitiveness, and so that they can continue to act now and in the future. Thank you. Ms. Michaud, welcome to the committee. It's your turn. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. It's highly appreciated. I'm replacing Ms. Posé, so I'm not very familiar with this initiative. I understand it's a program that was put in place in order to encourage or incentivize Canadian businesses to contribute to the GHG emission reductions. At the national level, the government aimed for 40 to 45% reduction by 2030. The program anticipates investing $8 billion for a reduction between 19 and 20 megatons of GHGs, if I've understood clearly. So I'm interested in the audit that was carried out by the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development. And there are criticisms on the method of calculating the reduction of emissions, also about the follow-up carried out with various businesses. One of the observations was that the initiative did not or does not allow attracting the largest emitters of Canada. And that may be that because the process is too long, it's too complex. In order to obtain funding, it takes about 1 year and 8 months. My question for Mr. DeMarco, this is an observation that you made. Could you tell us more about it? And do you think that given this is happening, that the initiative has achieved its goals, which is to have the largest emitters come and participate because they could have the biggest effect on GHG reduction? So thank you for the question. We have observed that the Net Zero Accelerator was not able to attract the largest emitters. As I said in my opening statements, there are some examples with the steel companies and one cement business, but that's not a lot when we looked at the 55 largest emitters in Canada. So that's one of our concerns. There's the absence of a horizontal industrial policy in Canada is also one of our concerns, and also the optimization of resources so that we can have value for money. There were no public calculations in terms of the value that we achieve with this fund in terms of taxpayers' money. For Canada. So that's an example. We have a number of concerns with this fund, but that's a summary of our three largest concerns with the Net Zero initiative. Thank you very much. According to your observations, Mr. DeMarco, how will the government, through the Department of Innovation and Environment, how do they do the follow-up with the businesses in order to ensure that the money that is awarded is connected with a decrease in GHGs? How do they make sure that once the money has been given out, there will be a decrease of GHGs emitted by the business? Is there a close follow-up that's carried out? And if so, how is that done? How are the calculations carried out? And I think that's also one of your observations, the fact that the method of calculation that's being used currently doesn't correspond to international standards, or actually I'll let you explain that to us. Do you have some concerns about that? We have concerns with the lack of compliance with the evaluation standards. Mr. Blouin can speak more about this topic. Mr. Blouin, thank you. So, in terms of the follow-up of or the tracking of these projects, other departments can tell you more, but there are measures for accountability from the businesses as an insurance that the businesses who commit to doing it in the project will meet those obligations. The other ministers would know more about this. The second half of your question is related to the methods of calculating. And so we do talk about some lacks of conformity with international standards to estimate the impact in terms of GHG emission reductions of particular projects. So the program was initiated in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. It was announced then. And the target is 2030 because it's the government's target for GHG emission reductions. So do you think we're on track to decrease by 19 to 20 megatons as the government estimated? Well, no, I'm not certain that the department is on the right track. We have looked at these agreements, and only 5 of them had provisions with X numbers megatons reduction. When we calculated what was happening with those 5 contracts, we noticed that there was only between 6 to 7 megaton equivalents of carbon dioxide. It's possible that there will be further emissions reductions, but what's guaranteed in those agreements is only a little bit more than 6 megatons. So it's not enough. Thank you. We'll stop there. Ms. Collins?
Thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. And yeah, especially Commissioner DeMarco, thank you so much, and to your whole team. I want to start maybe just one of the things that was shocking to me when I went to sit down and look at the documents was the number of pages that were redacted. Mr. DeMarco, when you looked at it was completely unredacted. Is that correct?
So the audit team goes through the piles of documents in a digital format. So Mr. Blouin can explain to you the nature of the free access provision that we have in the Auditor General Act and what he obtained.
I don't need a ton of a very short amount of time. So just they were unredacted documents.
They were unredacted.
Yeah.
Thank you. So then maybe just when it comes to sending parliamentarians unredacted documents, I'm curious, when I looked at the information, it said minimal redactions, and despite the theatrics of some of my colleagues, I do agree that 360 pages, and those were just the ones that were removed. When I looked at other pages, huge sections of them were redacted, and so it does leave me with this question: why aren't parliamentarians being given more information? And were all of those redactions absolutely necessary? And I guess maybe a connected question to that is, if we hadn't had our staff in with us, would the redactions have been, would there have been fewer redactions?
To the answer. I appreciate the question. Number one is with regards to sort of the statutory standing of the OAG in their own act. Number two is the parameters under which they're provided, which is under NDA, which the committee, even in the second section, will not be under. And so in the context of our obligation vis-a-vis the proponents, our requirement is that we consult with them and seek their permission. That's what we did. With regards to the nature, understanding that, 300 may seem a lot, but that is 300 in the context of multiple thousands of pages. And so to understand the type of information, it's almost identical across the sections that have been redacted, and they're primarily around the statements of work.
Now, I did notice there were a few contracts where things weren't redacted as heavily, and I was curious about the difference, why some contracts was it just the permission given by those third parties, or
It is, so the items that were redacted are of two natures. Number one, personal and private, personal information, primarily commercial information. And so the commercial information for almost all of them is around the statement of work and how they anticipate doing their work, which is could be prejudicial, or they feel is prejudicial to their capacity to remain competitive. And so that is based on requests of the recipients.
Okay, and then my final question, just around if it had just been members of Parliament who were accessing the documents, would the redactions have been
legal? And I understand it is the same.
It would have been the same regardless. Yep. Okay. I guess I have more questions about that, but I'll leave that for the in-camera session of this. And so maybe to turn back to you, Commissioner Barco, can you talk a little bit about what you mentioned around the horizontal industrial decarbonization policy? This is something that my NDP colleagues and I have been calling for, a comprehensive industrial strategy. We see what the U.S.'s Inflation Reduction Act, what kind of impact that has had, and that we have not, kind of stepped up to that same level here in Canada. So can you highlight a little bit what a comprehensive industrial green strategy, how it would help us attract investment, and and the kind of reflections on the Inflation Reduction Act as well?
Yes, I'd be pleased to. So, as you see from today, you have more than one department involved in the whole of government endeavor to meet the 2030 target, but each acts in some ways in silos. And so, what a horizontal industrial decarbonization policy for the government of Canada would do would be a big picture plan to guide all of the different departments, including the two that are here today, as well as NRCan, for example, in guiding their efforts as to where to best, from a value for money point of view, invest the Canadian taxpayers' money. So it's essentially the grand plan that would be weaving together all of the different elements of Canada's various subsidy programs for this sort of thing. In the absence of a grand plan, there is the fear that each department will work too much in silos and they won't maximize the value for money and act in a way that is considered coherent amongst all of their programs. And
you provided some recommendations, and you mentioned that the responses to those recommendations, and just for clarity, was it just to ISED that those recommendations went? And you mentioned some of the responses were vague. Was the response to this recommendation in particular vague, and can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes. So as we indicated in the report, our audit uncovered the larger issue that the government of Canada as a whole needs to address. So each department has its own mandate, but sometimes an audit reveals, even though this has only one auditee, reveals a larger problem that admittedly ISED itself can't resolve on its own unilaterally. It would need assistance from the central agencies and government as a whole. So that's recommendation 20, where we recommended a strategic horizontal approach to detail the steps to reach Canada's climate goals. So this is what we just spoke about. And
Okay, I'm gonna have to
indeed,
stop.
their response is
Yeah.
vague, and that's their response
I'm
to
going to have to
recommendation
stop there.
20.
I'm going to have to stop there. We're well over time. We'll go to a second round, a 4-minute and 2-minute round. Mr. Deltel, Cabinet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, collègues.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, colleagues. Welcome to your Canadian Parliament. We have to remember we're here to talk about $8 billion of taxpayers' money. Let's remember that the program we're analyzing today is called the Net Zero Accelerator. The goal is to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, and that's aimed to be 40 to 45% by 2030. The public documents that we have say that it's a foreign business, Volkswagen, that received from Canadian taxpayers $700 million. And let's be clear, Mr. Bilodeau, I'm not looking for the caramel secret, or I don't want to know how they're going to be building the batteries or manufacturing the batteries and where. But your goal is to reduce emissions. That's a clear question. How many emissions will be reduced with the $700 million of taxpayers' money that were awarded to a foreign business?
Du programme, pas uniquement.
The program is not just a reduction of short-term emissions. It includes the transition and also developing new technologies. So we have to consider all aspects. Second point, in relation to your question, is I still don't have a number to give you. Well, that's the problem, Mr. Bilodeau. We're talking about $700 million. I understand that your goal is a long-term goal, but it's also to reduce from 40 to 45% the GHG emissions by 2030. That's in your mandate letter. I'm not inventing it. Now you have awarded $700 million of taxpayers' money to a foreign business, and you can't tell the taxpayers how many greenhouse gas emissions will be eliminated by then. So this project was funded under Pillar 3. I'm not talking about Pillar, I'm talking about taxpayer money. Canadians have given $700 million to reduce GHG emissions to a business. How many will be reduced with the $700 million that Canadian gave to a foreign business? How many GHGs? I have no more information than I had to give to a preceding intervener. So Canadian wants to know. Point of order. Yes, Ms. Châtel. We're repeating a question that cannot be answered. When we're talking about transforming an economy to a green economy, what's the point of repeating a question?
Going into debate, I think it.
No, but I'll make that determination. What I would say is, yes, there's repetition, but that's the prerogative of the questioner. If the questioner feels that repetition will, over time, bring out new aspects of the question, then that can be their questioning strategy. But so I don't, I understand what the tactic is, but it's. No, I'm saying in terms of questioning. No, but I'm saying it's okay that you can do that.
I will, for sure.
Yeah.
You don't mind?
No. What I'm saying is I don't agree with Madame Chatel's point of order that you can ask the question as many times as you want because it may be a way to shake the tree loose a bit.
Well,
so go ahead.
Just soyons très clairs. Et ça s'adresse à tout le.
Let's be very clear, and this is for everyone. In the mandate letter of the project that's called Net Zero Accelerator Initiative, it targets a decrease in GHG gas emissions by 40 to 45%. I'm not inventing anything. Okay. So continue to ask questions of our witnesses. My question isn't based on an answer we can't get. It's based on a letter of intent, a mandate letter, where it says that you have the goal of reducing them by 40 to 45%, and you're not able to target the reduction that you're carrying out with the business that you've awarded of $700 million. So I'm not criticizing you, but Canadians learned recently that the Green Sustainable Technology Fund was in which $390 million hadn't been managed according to the ethical rules. So how can that happen? I'm also talking about something else, Lyon Electric, $500 million. No one profited from it. The company is in great difficulty. Recently, the mayor of Saint Jérôme gave his opinion. He said, 3 years ago, we had Justin Trudeau come to us, and he was announcing buying money for transporting school children. So $500 million. I'm not the one saying it. And he's saying that the program never functioned. Mr. Van Couverden, 4 minutes.
Witnesses for coming today, and for my part, thank you for protecting the integrity of these contracts from partisan games. I do not believe that it would suit. I've never run a multi-billion-dollar company before, but I think I'd be rather reticent to provide every single detail to these contracts, given how toxic various parliaments have become over the last couple of years. I think it's important that they have funding agreements. I also think it's important that we get reports and timely information and that they be scrutinized, and I think that's been done very, very well. But I'm also glad that the integrity of that confidential information between a multi-billion-dollar organization and a nation is important to protect. It's also important for our competitiveness, because we don't want future companies just to say, I don't want to be used for partisan reasons. I just want to do business. And in the case of both the decarbonization of the steel industry in my region in Hamilton, we're very grateful for the improvements that's going to make to our atmospheric pollution. And I also know just down the road from Milton in St. Thomas, we're going to see huge growth in jobs thanks to the Volkswagen factory and others as well down in that region. So I'll say that over the last couple of weeks in particular, the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, has been talking about jobs. And then when asked about their plans to lower emissions and fight climate change, they really only respond with one answer, and that's technology. And I think of immediately technologies like decarbonizing our steel industry, improving electrification, and working towards cleaner, large industrial manufacturing techniques. Could you point to job creation? I know that's not necessarily directly in your mandate, but the Rust Belt in Ontario has.
Mr. Mazier.
This is a net zero accelerator. This is to reduce emissions. It has nothing to do with jobs, actually. This study is all about where did the $8 billion go and how many emissions have been reduced.
So the member opposite, Dan Mazier,
wait
might want to simplify this and make it just about one thing, and to suggest that the Net Zero Accelerator Fund is just an emissions reductions plan, but that's not the case. I'll point to the fact it's not solely for emissions reductions.
Yeah, I guess
it does many other things. In order to...
Okay, Mr. Van Couverden, Mr. Bilodeau, in some of his answers referenced, to be fair, I'm going to have to pause the meeting. Anytime I pause the meeting, it's eating into the time of the meeting. So, Madame Chatel, Mr. Bilodeau did mention that one of the pillars of the program was more directly tied to job creation, and of course, the green transition is all part of the big ball of wax we call, moving to a greener economy. So I wouldn't spend too much time on jobs, but it's not entirely out of the frame. So, go ahead, Mr. Van Couverden.
I know that the Conservatives would like everything to be very, very simple, and I also know that they brought 360 blank pages indicating that they've done a tremendous amount of research on this. But it is about more than just lowering our emissions. It's about investing in the green economy, and that's why it's true that we continually say, if you don't have a plan for the environment, then you don't have a plan for the economy. In this context, this is absolutely true. Our manufacturing sector in southwestern Ontario is a large emitting sector. It always has been, but as we know, we've lost a lot of jobs from the Rust Belt. It's where I grew up and where I live. And now this government is investing in a very competitive environment, I'd say. So with respect to the Emissions Reduction Act down in the United States, the competitiveness that basically informed us on, and we needed to, invest in order to attract these jobs, this investment in these technological opportunities. Could you speak specifically to jobs in both St. Thomas and with respect to how important these investments are for the steel industry, particularly in Hamilton and Algoma?
So I will ask Stephanie in a moment to talk specifically about St. Thomas. On sort of the broader picture, our estimate is basically on the basis of agreements to date. We estimate that about 36,000 jobs will be created, and R&D commitments exceeding $4.5 billion will be made. It's important to recognize that we're seeing a major shift in the industrial landscape. And part of the objective is to support Canada as we shift towards that, as the economic basis changes. Investments like Volkswagen, though $700 million is a large investment, represent a broad investment where that $700 million is only 10% of the total investment that is being made in Canada. And so while there is certainly an objective on the short term, around, particularly around Pillar 1, around achieving short-term megaton reductions, there's certainly a broader objective to the program around the restructuring of the economy and the development of the technologies that will help both Canada and the world meet GHG emissions.
Merci. Madame Michaud, vous avez 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. When I was asking Mr. DiMarco my questions, Mr. Bilodeau, you didn't seem to completely agree with what Mr. DiMarco was saying. So I would like to give you the opportunity to answer those questions. I will list them all quickly, and I'll leave you the rest of my time. So it's 5 years until the 2030 target. Do you think we're on the right track for investing all this money to decrease the emissions by 19 to 20 megatons of greenhouse gas? Do you agree with the fact that the process is too long and complex for businesses to be able to profit from that program? And why is it so long and complex to include the agreements? And why are we not attracting the large emitters who should, in my opinion, be the ones that would make the biggest changes, biggest reductions? I'll let you answer. So about the first question, it's the department's estimation that currently it's about 11 megatons. It's 6 to 7 in the contractual agreements. There will be penalties for the companies that can't reach their targets. So that's a conservative estimate. So even then, there would be a larger effect on emissions than the 6 to 7 in the contracts. With the projects that are being initiated, we estimate that we should achieve about 20 megatons. Of course, there's always a certain degree of uncertainty in these figures. There are always is always uncertainty in this type of project. In terms of the long and complex, so the investment is about $200 million. So the government feels they have to do due diligence and make sure the process is good. And I understand that with these energies, Canada must be the largest investor. So our investment generates activity and interest in the project. Thank you very much. Ms. Collins?
In his report that there was, and I'm quoting, incomplete due diligence on greenhouse gas emission reduction commitments. He had noted his concerns here, but also in the report about value for money, given that the reduction commitments weren't strict enough, and also just that standard practices weren't followed. Was the minister, or were there any concerns raised in the drafting of this and when the minister was approving projects? At any point, did people raise these concerns before the audit happened?
maybe two elements to my answer in terms of value for money.
Could you start with a yes or no, just in terms of, did anyone raise these kinds of concerns before the audit occurred?
In terms of incomplete due diligence?
Incomplete due diligence on greenhouse gas emissions reductions, concerns about value for money, given the emissions reductions were not strict enough, double counting, the not following standard practices. Were there any concerns raised?
So value for money would not have been our own assessment in terms of, so we would.
Sorry, but just, do you mind starting with the question? Did anyone?
The minister was fully informed of due diligence.
And no concerns were raised?
And in all instances, it was the recommendation of the department that the projects.
But were any concerns raised at any point by the minister or anyone in your department, anyone before this audit took place?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. What about the fact, one of the things I was curious about, the commissioner noted fast track, projects could be fast tracked with a letter from the Prime Minister. Is that standard practice in other departments?
Well, I should clarify. In all instances, projects went through full due diligence of the department. That includes review by the GHG committee, the investment review committee. In this specific instances, the program provided for in some instances where time was in the essence.
And is that a normal process in other departments?
That is, in all instances, projects were approved by one or the other of Cabinet Committee, either full Cabinet or Treasury Board, in all instances by Treasury Board, and it is not in deviation with what we might see in programs.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Leslie. Pardon? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to start with a fairly straightforward question. What is the government's emission reduction target? And I'm using the word target specifically. What is the emission reduction target of the $8 billion net accelerator fund?
As per sort of what was reported in the CES, in the OAG, and by Environment Canada, we expect 19 to 20 megatons.
My question is, what is the target of the program's $8 billion in spending? What is the target of emissions reductions?
Any specific targets that would have been included in the policy approval at this point are cabinet confidence?
And to just to clarify, cabinet confidence means it must be kept secret?
Correct.
Why would the target number of emissions for $8 billion need to be kept secret?
As I said, I am bound by cabinet confidence, and so at this point, I do not have.
Could you guess why literally a number would need to be kept secret?
I wouldn't provide conjecture in that space.
Okay. Now, the Liberals gave $61 million to Pratt & Whitney, which is a subsidiary of Raytheon Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar aerospace and defense company, to develop a new type of engine. And my question is, do you think that company could develop a new engine without $61 million of taxpayer money?
I believe that the investments provided both help secure Canadian mandates, development of technology in Canada, work in Canada, and hopefully will lead to technology that will lead to decarbonization of a fairly emissions-intensive sector.
Now, in the case of that contract, how much could be non-repayable? How much could be not paid back to the government?
I think that's information that is within the realms of the contribution agreement. I would propose that that's appropriate for the second part of the discussion.
Okay. Do you see why it's frustrating for the folks I represent, all of us represent, when we're seeing taxes increase on seniors, on home heating, on just life in general, and we're seeing billions of dollars handed out to big, sometimes Canadian, European, other nations around the world based parent companies without an actual commitment of any type to reduce emissions? Do you see why that's frustrating for folks?
I have no comment on that.
Okay, well, I view it in many ways as a blank check for big companies, and I think many taxpayers do too. Now, as discussed earlier, the Environment Commissioner discovered that you did not conduct value for money audits. So continuing on in that space, since you have no credible data, you won't tell us what the target of the entirety of the program is. We have no credible data to ensure that emissions reductions actually take place, and therefore we can't measure the cost effectiveness. how can you guarantee the folks that I represent that there has not been wasted money?
So I could say that the projects were all individually reviewed in quite thorough ways for a number of factors, including job creation, including technology development, and particularly for the ones that are in phase one, their megaton reductions till 2030. The due diligence process is actually fairly rigorous, hence we were discussing the length of time it makes, and help to support the development of Canadian industry.
I mean, I would hope that it's rigorous. I think expecting anything less is simply insane. But there's also been a double counting of emissions across various other programs, as reported by the commissioner, and a clear lack of, I think, focus. And will the department be going forward doing value for money audits on any other future programs of this nature? Or has the lesson been learned, or are we going to continue to provide vague responses back to the Environment Commissioner?
Time's up. We'll go now to Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to focus my questions with Mr. Bilodeau, and thank you to Mr. DeMarco for being here again in the committee. When Mr. DeMarco was last at our committee, we talked about the gap between policies being launched and then getting results on the greenhouse gas reductions. I'm looking at this from two different angles. One, I've worked in electric arc furnaces or on electric arc furnaces in steel mills. They're massive. When you shut down an electric arc furnace, you shut down the steel mill. And so timing on working on those furnaces, sometimes you have to wait years to get into the production schedule to work on a furnace. I've also worked on the dryer kilns in concrete plants, and it's very much the same. When the kiln goes down, the plant goes down. When we're looking at the large emitters in the phase one, we're actually talking about getting right to the heart of their operations, and that's not an easy thing to do. Second part of my comments would be working with the board of directors, and I've sat on boards of international companies. The Canadian division has a Canadian managing director. It's a separate balance sheet within a larger organization. You have to ask for capital for your region. You have to get board approval for capital for your region. Then you have to expend the capital and implement the improvements that you've pitched to the board in order to get approvals. So between getting things through boards of directors and through production, could you talk about the real life challenge of businesses trying to implement net zero programs that we've put forward?
Appreciate the question. I think the decisions that face companies that are making very, very large investments with a view to decarbonize is multiple. Obviously, they have shareholders, they have business imperatives. I will actually ask Stephanie, who's more directly involved in sort of the negotiation and the collaboration with the companies, to maybe provide a bit more.
And thank you. And I'm not looking for excuses for the businesses. I'm looking at what is the real life consequence of trying to get a program implemented.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I would say, the member is correct. These are incredibly complex, large, high-risk projects that often require significant inputs and decisions for the companies to decide to make final investment decisions. In the case of a lot of the projects under Pillar 1, and as is the case in a number of the projects that we continue to have in our pipeline, companies, we're often the first in as providing a commitment towards the project, not dispersing, not signing a contribution agreement, not dispersing funding, but as far as sending a signal that this project is going to advance Canada's net zero objectives. And we do that. I think as the audit actually pointed out, I think 6 out of the 10 projects that were the CTA projects that at the time of the audit, 6 of those were in FEED study at the time of the audit. So then, the companies need to take a look at a lot of things. They need to look at making sure they have the full financial stack. They need to make sure they're going to look at regulations.
Sure.
They're going to look at risk.
Thank you. And unlimited time. At the same time, we're competing against other companies or organizations in other countries who may be also seeking federal compensation for some of the large capital projects. So it is a global market that we're competing against.
Thank you.
Is that fair?
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Alors, ça termine notre première heure.
So this concludes our first hour. Before taking a short break to begin our in-camera session, I have a question to ask the committee. As we know, for the in-camera session, each MP has the right to have one staff member here, and whips also have the same right, and every leader in the House also has the right to have one a staff member. Do I have the permission of the committee to invite the support personnel, the people who support our witnesses? Most of them are sitting in the first row behind. Do I have the